A black Marine faces injustice at his son's proudest moment. But when 6 silent heroes rise from the crowd, the room freezes in awe. What happens next will leave you speechless. Join us for a story of courage and loyalty that'll grip your heart. The late May sun hung low over the small town of Cedar Hollow, Louisiana, its golden rays glinting off the asphalt of Carver High's parking lot. Dust swirled faintly as Solomon Dryden eased his weathered Ford Mustang into a spot near the school's chain-link fence. At 47, he carried the weight of years in his broad shoulders, his deep brown eyes steady but softened by memory. His skin, a rich mahogany, bore faint scars from a life of service, and his close-cropped black hair was flecked with silver. He wore his Marine dress blues, the jacket crisp, medals pinned neatly over his heart. Not for show, but for a promise kept. His polished black boots hit the ground with purpose as he stepped out, smoothing the uniform with calloused hands. This was Tyron's day, his son's high school graduation, and nothing would keep Solomon from it. He paused, leaning back into the car to retrieve a faded leather wallet from the glove box. Inside was a photo, its edges worn. His late wife, Lena, smiling with baby Tyron in her arms, her braids framing a face full of light. 2 years had passed since cancer took her, but her presence lingered in every mile Solomon drove from Baton Rouge. "We made it, Lena," he murmured, tucking the photo into his pocket. The Mustang, her old car, hummed with her memory, its red paint chipped but proud. Solomon locked the door and walked toward the school, his stride deliberate. Each step a quiet vow. Carver High loomed ahead, its faded brick walls draped with banners for the class of 2025. Families crowded the entrance, parents in sundresses, kids waving signs, an elderly man with a cane, each face alive with anticipation. Solomon's height, 6'2", and his uniform drew glances as he approached. A woman in a floral skirt nudged her husband, whispering. A teenager snapped a quick photo, then looked away. Solomon didn't flinch. He'd worn this skin and this uniform long enough to know which stares held weight. At the gym doors, he presented his ticket to a harried volunteer, a young woman with a clipboard. She scanned it, nodded, and pointed inside. "Family seating, second row, right side," she said, barely looking up. "Thank you," Solomon replied, his voice deep and even, like a river over stone. He stepped into the gym, the air thick, with the scent of sweat and cheap cologne, the hum of voices bouncing off concrete walls. The room was a sea of folding chairs and packed bleachers, balloons bobbing above the crowd. Solomon wove through, his eyes scanning for Tyron among the gowned students at the far end. At 18, Tyron had his mother's sharp cheekbones and Solomon's quiet intensity, his lanky frame draped in a black robe. Solomon's chest tightened, not pain, but pride, raw and unnameable. He found his seat, a flimsy plastic chair that creaked under his weight. Settling in, he adjusted his cuffs, the metals catching the fluorescent light. Around him, families chattered, programs fluttered, and a child spilled soda giggling. Solomon sat still, the photo against his heart a steady pulse, his gaze fixed on the stage where silver letters spelled out Class of 2025. Today he was just a father, here for his son, but the world as always had other plans. Of fathers. Pride lights up the room, but will shadows fall on this joyful day? Stay tuned to find out. The gym at Carver High thrummed with the restless pulse of a Louisiana evening, its brick walls trapping the humid May air like a held breath. Solomon Dryden sat in the second row, his Marine dress blues a beacon amid the sea of floral dresses and wrinkled button-downs. His mahogany skin, etched with faint scars from years of service, caught the harsh fluorescent glow, and his close-cropped black hair, flecked with silver, framed a face carved by resolve. At 47, his deep brown eyes held a quiet intensity, softened only by the weight of memory. The photo of Lena and baby Tyron nestled in his jacket pocket, its worn edges a tether to a promise he'd made, to be here, today, for their son. His broad shoulders, squared from habit, filled the flimsy plastic chair which creaked as he shifted, his polished black boots firm against the scuffed floor. The crowd was a living mosaic of Cedar Hollow, grandparents clutching programs, teenagers, snapping selfies, a father balancing a toddler on his knee. Solomon's gaze drifted to the students lined up along the gym's far wall, their black gowns swaying like shadows in the dim light. Tyron stood near the center, his lanky 6-foot frame unmistakable, his mother's sharp cheekbones catching the flicker of a spotlight. At 18, he carried Lena's quick, unguarded smile, but his dark eyes mirrored Solomon's, steady, searching, alive with a fire that spoke of dreams yet to unfold. Solomon's chest tightened, a pang of pride laced with ache. He saw flashes of Tyron's childhood, teaching him to ride a bike on their Baton Rouge driveway. Lena's laughter as she bandaged scraped knees, the quiet nights after her funeral, when they'd sit on the porch sharing stories of her warmth. A volunteer in a red vest shuffled down the aisle, offering programs. Solomon accepted one, his low thank you carrying the weight of a man who chose words carefully. The program listed names and awards, but he didn't read it. His eyes were on Tyron, now adjusting his red honor cord, chatting with a classmate. Around Solomon, the crowd's energy shifted. A man in a plaid shirt 3 rows back stared, his jaw tight, then whispered to his wife. A woman with a cross necklace glanced at Solomon's medals, her lips pursing before she turned away. He let the moments pass, his face impassive. He'd worn this uniform through deserts and doubts, faced stares in courtrooms and diners. These were just ripples, not waves. But the air grew heavier, the hum of voices carrying a faint edge he'd learned to recognize. The lights dimmed, and a principal in a navy blazer stepped to the podium, her voice crackling through the microphone. "Welcome, families, to the class of 2025. The crowd quieted, chairs scraping, fans fluttering. Solomon straightened, his posture a reflex of discipline, the medals on his chest glinting like stars. The national anthem began, a student's voice soaring slightly off-key but earnest. Solomon stood, hand over heart, his gaze on the flag above the stage. He thought of Lena, how she'd sing this song softly while cooking Sunday dinners, and of Tyron stepping into a world that would demand his strength. As the anthem ended, applause rippled through the gym, and Solomon sat, the photo in his pocket a steady pulse. But as the crowd settled, 2 figures emerged from the shadows of the aisle, security guards, their radios buzzing, their steps deliberate. Their eyes were fixed on him and a chill ran through the humid air. What did they want with a father here to see his son? The air in Carver High's gym thickened, the hum of anticipation giving way to a taut undercurrent as the graduation ceremony began. Solomon Dryden sat rigid in his second-row seat, his marine dress blues crisp against the faded plastic chair, the medals on his chest catching the flicker of overhead lights. His mahogany skin bore the faint scars of a life shaped by duty, and his silver-flecked black hair framed a face etched with calm defiance. At 47, his deep brown eyes held the stage, but his senses were attuned to the 2 security guards now standing at the end of his row. The photo of Lena and baby Tyron pressed against his heart, a steady reminder of why he was here. To see his son, Tyron, walk across that stage. His broad shoulders, squared from years of discipline, didn't waver, but the weight of the moment settled like dust on his polished black boots. The guards wore black polos with cedar security embroidered in white, their radios crackling faintly. The shorter one, broad-chested with a buzz cut, had a name tag reading Garvin. His eyes, narrow and unyielding, fixed on Solomon like a hawk sizing up prey. The taller guard, lanky with a restless jaw chewing gum, bore the name Malley. He shifted his weight, less certain, his hand hovering near a flashlight clipped to his belt. Solomon noticed their approach during the anthem, but he hadn't moved, his hand steady over his heart, his gaze on the flag. Now, as the principal's welcoming speech echoed, Garvin stepped closer, his shadow falling across Solomon's program. "Sir," he said, voice low but sharp, "we need you to come with us." Solomon turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting Garvin's without a flicker of fear. "Is there a problem?" His voice was deep, measured like gravel settling in a stream. He reached into his jacket, pulling out the printed ticket, its edges creased from his grip. Second row, right side. Family seating, confirmed. Garvin didn't glance at the ticket, his lips tightening. This section's full, he said, gesturing vaguely. Solomon's gaze didn't waver. It was full when I sat down. Who gave you that order? The question hung, simple but pointed, and Mally shifted uncomfortably, his gum chewing slowing. The crowd around them stirred, sensing the shift. A woman in a yellow dress one row back leaned forward, her program forgotten, whispering to her, "Son?" A man with a goatee in the bleachers tilted his head, eyes narrowing. Solomon felt the weight of their stares, not new but never welcome. He'd faced this before, in uniform, in civilian clothes, in places where his presence alone seemed to challenge the air. I drove 6 hours to see my son graduate, he said, his tone steady but firm, like a blade sheathed but ready. I'm staying right here. Garvin's jaw clenched, his hand brushing the radio on his hip. Look, we're just doing our job. There's seats in the back, let's not make this a thing. The word back landed like a stone, its meaning older than the gym's peeling paint. Solomon's eyes narrowed, not with anger but with a quiet calculation honed in deserts and debriefings. You're not doing your job, he said, voice lower now, cutting through the crowd's murmur. You're making a choice. Mally glanced at Garvin, his confidence faltering, but Garvin doubled down. Sir, I'm asking one last time, he said, stepping closer, his belt grazing Solomon's knee. The crowd's chatter faded, replaced by a hush that spread like ripples. Tyron, standing among the gowned students, caught the movement from the corner of his eye. His lanky frame stiffened, his mother's sharp cheekbones taut with concern. At 18, he knew his father's stillness, the same unyielding calm he'd seen when bullies taunted him as a boy, when Solomon taught him to stand tall without raising a fist. Tyron's hands clenched, his honor cord swaying, but he stayed, in line, trusting his father's strength. A woman 2 seats over, her gray hair pinned tightly, leaned toward Solomon. You don't move, honey, she whispered, her voice fierce but soft. Solomon gave a slight nod, acknowledging her without breaking focus. The principal's speech faltered, her eyes darting to the aisle. The gym, alive with balloons and banners, felt smaller now, its walls closing in on a moment no one had expected. Solomon sat unmoved, his hands resting lightly on his thighs, the photo in his pocket a quiet vow. He didn't want a scene, only to see Tyron's name called, to feel Lena's pride through him. But as Garvin's radio crackled and Mally stepped forward, their intent clear, a shadow loomed larger than the stage. Who else was watching, ready to change the course of this night? The gym at Carver High pulsed with a brittle tension, the Louisiana evening's humidity clinging to the air like a held grudge. Solomon Dryden sat unyielding in his second-row seat, his marine dress blues a stark emblem of duty amid the restless crowd. His mahogany skin, etched with faint scars from battles long past, gleamed under the fluorescent glare, and his silver-flecked black hair framed a face of resolute calm. At 47, his deep brown eyes remained fixed on the stage, but his senses tracked the security guards, Garvin and Mally, now looming closer. The photo of Lena and baby Tyron rested against his heart, its worn edges a vow to stay, no matter the cost. His broad shoulders, forged by years of service, held steady, his polished black boots planted firm, the medals on his chest glinting like a quiet challenge. Garvin, the shorter guard, stood inches from Solomon's chair, his buzz cut, head tilted, name tag flashing, Cedar Security. His broad chest heaved, eyes narrowed with a mix of authority and unease. Mally, lanky and jittery, chewed his gum faster, his hand twitching near the flashlight on his belt. The principal's speech droned on, a hollow backdrop to the tightening knot of conflict. Sir, Garvin said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the crowd's murmur. You're in the wrong section. Family seating's reserved. Move to the back. The word back landed like a slap, its weight heavier than logistics. older than the gym's faded banners. Solomon's gaze shifted, slow and deliberate, meeting Garvin's with a stillness that spoke louder than words. "This is my seat," he said, his voice a deep, unyielding rumble like thunder before a storm. He held up his ticket, its creases worn from his grip. "Second row, right side. Family seating. My son's graduating. Today." Mally glanced at the ticket, then away, his jaw working harder on the gum. "It's full up here," he muttered, avoiding Solomon's eyes. "Plenty of spots in the bleachers." Solomon didn't flinch. "I drove 6 hours to be here," he said, each word precise, cutting through the humid air. "I'm not moving." The crowd's hum faltered, heads turning as the standoff drew focus. A man in a red cap 3 rows over whispered to his wife, their eyes darting to Solomon's medals. A teenager in the bleachers angled her phone, recording discreetly. Tyron, among the gowned students, caught the tension from across the gym. His lanky frame stiffened, his mother's sharp cheekbones taut, his dark eyes flashing with a fire that echoed his father's. At 18, he knew this script, the way people tested Solomon, mistaking his calm for weakness. He gripped his honor cord, torn between staying in line and stepping forward, but his father's lessons held him. "Choose your battles, son, with your head, not your heart." Garvin's hand rested on his radio, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just come with us." Solomon's jaw tightened, not with anger but with a calculation honed in Kandahar's chaos. "You're the ones making it hard," he said, voice low, lethal in its clarity. "Step away." The words landed like a gauntlet, and Mally shifted, his confidence crumbling. But Garvin leaned in, his belt grazing Solomon's chair, his tone edging toward a threat. "Last chance, sir," he said, loud enough for the nearby rows to hear. A woman in a green scarf gasped softly, clutching her purse. Another voice, gruff and low, muttered, "Let the man stay." Across the gym, a figure stood, unnoticed at first, blending into the bleachers' shadows. Creed Marston, 45, his salt and pepper beard trimmed close, wore a black polo and jeans, his broad frame carrying the quiet power of a man who'd faced worse than gym disputes. His hazel eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked on the guards. He didn't speak, didn't move closer, but his presence shifted the air. Another man rose. Javier Meeks, lean and wiry, his dark skin blending with a gray jacket, taking a seat near the aisle. Then Zachary Wells, stocky, his bald head gleaming, stood in the back row. No uniforms, no signals, just a shared instinct, forged in the dust of Afghanistan where Solomon had pulled them from hell's edge. Tyron's breath caught, sensing the change. He didn't know these men, but their posture, still, deliberate, mirrored his father's. The principal's speech stumbled, her eyes flicking to the aisle. The crowd's whispers grew, a tide of unease and curiosity. A grandmother in a purple hat leaned toward Solomon, her voice fierce. "You hold your ground, son." Solomon nodded, a flicker of gratitude, but his focus stayed on Garvin, whose hand now gripped his radio like a lifeline. The guards hadn't noticed the men rising. Not yet, but the gym felt smaller, its walls pressing in on a moment, teetering, on the edge. Solomon sat unmoved, the photo in his pocket a vow, his silence a shield. He wanted only to see Tyron's name called, to honor Lena's memory. But as Creed's shadow lengthened and Garvin's voice hardened, a storm was brewing, and someone was about to learn the cost of crossing a line. The gym at Carver High hung in a fragile silence, the Louisiana evening's humidity amplifying the weight of every breath. Solomon Dryden sat resolute in his second-row seat, his marine dress blues a beacon of defiance, the medals on his chest glinting under the fluorescent haze. His mahogany skin, marked by faint scars of sacrifice, shone with quiet strength, and his silver-flecked black hair framed eyes that held the stage but saw everything. At 47, Solomon's broad shoulders remained unbowed, the photo of Lena and baby Tyron a steady pulse against his heart. The security guards, Garvin and Mally, loomed over him, Their cedar security polos stretched tight with misplaced authority, but the air had shifted. Something unspoken was rising. Garvin, buzz-cut and broad, gripped his radio, his voice a low growl. "You're disrupting the event," he said, leaning so close his belt brushed Solomon's chair. "Move now, or we'll move you." Mally, lanky and uneasy, chewed his gum frantically, his eyes darting to the crowd. Solomon's gaze didn't falter, his voice a deep, unyielding tide. "You've made your point," he said, each word deliberate. "Now walk away." The crowd's murmurs died, replaced by a hush that swallowed the principal's faltering speech. Eyes turned. Parents, students, a janitor pausing mid-sweep, drawn to the standoff like moths to a flame. Tyron, among the gowned students, felt his heart pound, his lanky frame rigid, his mother's sharp cheekbones taut with fury. At 18, he knew his father's calm was a fortress, built through years of facing down worse than 2 guards in a gym. But the sight of Garvin's looming figure ignited a fire in Tyron's chest, his hands clenching his honor cord. He took a half-step forward, then stopped, remembering Solomon's words. "Your strength is in your choices, not your fists." Across the gym, Creed Marston stood in the bleachers, his salt and pepper beard catching the light, his hazel eyes locked on the guards. Javier Meeks, lean in a gray jacket, rose near the aisle, his dark skin blending with the shadows. Zachary Wells, stocky and bald, stood in the back, his presence a quiet thunder. 3 more, Soto, Lim, Horton, rose silently, their faces carved, with the resolve of men who'd bled with Solomon in Kandahar's dust. The guards didn't see them, not yet. Garvin's hand twitched toward his flashlight, his voice rising. "You think that uniform gives you a pass?" The accusation cut deep, older than the gym's peeling walls, and a gasp rippled through the crowd. A woman in a blue shawl whispered, "That's not right." Solomon's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise. "You don't know what this uniform means," he said, voice low, lethal in its truth. Mally stepped back, sensing the crowd's shift, but Garvin pressed on, his ego a lit fuse. "This isn't your show," he snapped, reaching for Solomon's arm. A voice sliced through, clear and commanding. "Step away from him." Creed Marston stepped into the aisle, his black polo taut over his broad frame, his tone not loud but heavy, like a gavel's fall. Garvin froze, hand midair, his eyes darting to Creed. "Who are you?" he demanded, but his voice cracked. Creed didn't blink. "The man telling you to stop." Javier moved closer, his lean form a shadow of menace. Zachary's bald head gleamed as he crossed his arms, his silence louder than words. The principal stopped speaking, her hands gripping the podium. Tyron's breath caught, his eyes wide. He didn't know these men, but their unity mirrored his father's strength, a bond forged in fire. The crowd leaned in, phones raised, capturing the moment. A grandfather in a straw hat muttered, "Let the man be." Garvin's face reddened, but he hesitated, sensing the weight of 6 men who didn't flinch. Mally tugged his arm, whispering, "Let's go." But Garvin's pride held him, his hand still near Solomon's chair. Creed took another step, his voice a blade. "You touch him, you answer to us." The gym felt electric, the tension a living thing. Solomon sat still, the photo in his pocket his anchor, his silence a shield. He wanted only to see Tyron graduate, to honor Lena's love. The guards wavered, outnumbered by a loyalty they couldn't grasp. As Garvin's radio crackled, and the seals closed in, the room held its breath, waiting for the spark that would ignite the truth. The gym at Carver High stood frozen, its humid Louisiana air charged with a tension that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. Solomon Dryden remained steadfast in his second-row seat, his marine dress blues a symbol of unyielding resolve, the medals on his chest catching the dimming fluorescent light. His mahogany skin, etched with scars of sacrifice, shone with quiet dignity, and his silver-flecked black hair framed deep brown eyes that held the stage, but saw the 6 Navy SEALs now standing like sentinels. The photo of Lena and baby Tyron, pressed against his heart, a vow to honor her love by witnessing their son's triumph. At 47, Solomon's broad shoulders were a fortress, his polished black boots rooted, unmoved by the guard's fading authority. Garvin, the buzz-cut security guard, stood rigid, his cedar security polo damp with sweat, his hand frozen near his radio. Mally, lanky and pale, stepped back, his gum chewing stilled, eyes wide as he sensed the shift. Creed Marston's voice, sharp and unyielding, echoed in the hush. "Walk away," he said, his salt and pepper beard catching the light, his hazel eyes boring into Garvin. Javier Meeks, lean in his gray jacket, flanked the aisle, his dark skin blending with the shadows. Zachary Wells, stocky and bald, crossed his arms in the back. A silent storm. Soto, Lim, and Horton stood scattered but united, their presence a wall no guard could breach. The crowd held its breath, phones raised, capturing a moment that felt bigger than the gym's peeling walls. Garvin's face burned, his pride warring with the reality of 6 men who didn't blink. "This isn't over," he muttered. But Mally tugged his arm, urgency in his whisper. "Let's go, man." The principal, her navy blazer creased, hurried down the aisle, her voice low but firm. "Enough," she said, gesturing toward the exit. Garvin hesitated, then turned, his radio crackling as he and Mally retreated, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The crowd exhaled, murmurs rising like a tide. A woman in a red dress clapped softly. Others joined, a quiet rebellion against the injustice they'd witnessed. Solomon didn't move, his gaze returning to the stage, the photo in his pocket his anchor. Tyron, among the gowned students, felt his chest swell, his lanky frame trembling with pride. At 18, his mother's sharp cheekbones were taut, his dark eyes blazing with awe. He didn't know these men, Creed, Javier, Zachary, but their loyalty to his father was a language he understood, forged in stories of Kandahar Solomon had shared in quiet moments. Tyron's hands unclenched, his honor cord steady, his resolve mirroring his father's. To stand tall, to choose dignity over rage. The principal resumed her speech, voice shaky, calling names as the ceremony pressed on. But the gym had changed. Its air now carried respect, hard-earned and undeniable. The line of students moved forward, caps bobbing, laughter nervous but alive. Tyron was 3 names away, his palms damp against his gown. Solomon leaned forward, his eyes locked on his son, the boy who carried Lena's smile and his own fire. The announcer's voice rose, clear and deliberate. "Tyron Dryden." The name rang out and the gym erupted, clapping, whistling, a roar that shook the rafters. The SEALs, still standing, applauded in unison, their hands striking with precision, a salute to both father and son. Tyron walked the stage, chin high, step steady, his heart pounding with a pride deeper than the diploma in his hand. He shook the principal's hand, turned to the crowd, and found Solomon's eyes. His father's small, radiant smile said everything. "You did it, son." Solomon sat back, the weight in his chest lifting, not gone but lighter, a release that felt like Lena's hand on his. The crowd's applause lingered, parents standing, some wiping tears, moved by a moment they couldn't fully name. Tyron stepped off the stage, his gown swaying, and glanced back at Solomon, a nod passing between them, father and son bound by love and legacy. The ceremony ended, caps soaring, balloons drifting, but Solomon waited, letting the chaos swirl. Outside, the Louisiana sun dipped low, painting the parking lot gold. Tyron found him near the flagpole, diploma in hand, gown half unzipped. "You okay, Dad?" Tyron asked, his voice soft but steady. Solomon nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You walk tall, son. That's enough." Tyron's eyes glistened. "Those men, who were they?" Solomon glanced at Creed, Javier, and the others, now by their cars, their silent vigil unbroken. "Brothers," he said, "men who know what loyalty means." In the car, Solomon pulled out Lena's photo, passing it to Tyron. Strength isn't noise, he said. It's standing when others would run. In modern America, communities often rally against injustice, as seen in moments like these, where loyalty and dignity prevail. Studies show diverse groups like veterans strengthen social bonds, teaching us that unity can overcome division. Tyron held the photo, his voice low. I want to be like you. Solomon smiled, starting the Mustang's engine. You already are. As they drove into the dusk, the school fading behind, their bond felt eternal. But what new challenges awaited a father and son forged in such fire? If this story stirred your heart, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. For more tales of courage, comment below. What does strength mean to you? Share this with someone who needs to see true loyalty in action.